Hey guys, what's going on? In this video, we're going to cover a great combination of 7 movements that you can use on a daily basis for a combination of goals here. This is about really just trying to mobilize and kind of get the body opened up. This would be something that would be really great for anybody that sits for extended periods of time and is just looking for a way to improve the overall quality of their movement and connectivity throughout the body. So we begin. The first movement here is essentially prone, hip extension along with full extension of the spine. The idea here is to have the feet lying flat on the ground. This is a bit easier to see from the profile view. Kind of start in a little bit of a quadruped position, hands and knees on the floor, spine neutral, sit back. Allow the spine to flex and round just barely at the end, and then essentially push the hips and the full spine through extension. There's a whole bunch of things that matter here, and one would be you cannot roll off your thumbs, and that's usually what happens to a lot of people as they start coming forward here. You got to make sure your thumbs stay down and there's full, even distribution of weight throughout the movement. The next movement that we're going to go into here is going to be for your hip rotators, and it's going to be similar to what we were just doing, but now we're going to put one of your hips into a rotated position. This is going to totally change the nature of what has to stretch and where you feel it. So now this is going to be primarily in the right hip, and then pull through the spine. Same motions, effective and helpful to come up onto the fingertips on this one, tucking the chin, looking the spine and the head all the way up. The movements are pretty similar here with the hands, so any instructions in this aspect are going to be really the same for the first. Reaching, elongating the spine on this portion, walking the hands back up, tucking the chin, and trying to look the eyes up into the air all the way at the ceiling to get the spine into complete extension. You'll notice that it actually matters as well how much your foot potentially flexes here. So you really want to try and keep your foot as neutral as you can, and try not to allow yourself to bend your knee too much. So thus, the greater you are towards kind of like a 90-degree angle of that front leg, the better. It's going to pull more into the hip. And now again, on the other leg, you can see this from profile view. Same thing. Back leg goes into extension. We're up on the front of that back foot. Again, notice here from the side, look how upright the body can get, even with that front leg in that rotated position. Rounding the back, pulling the back into almost like an arch position here, trying to stretch and open up all those nerves throughout the spine. Extension here, looking the head back again, and then the forward reach and bend. You know, the flow and the timing of this, it'd be pretty on point with what you're looking for. You'd want to spend a good minute or so, minute and a half on each side. There's no need to rush this, no need to push through any pain or limitations here. If you sense hard stops and your body's reaching a lot of discomfort, then just limit the range. No pain. And into the third movement, we're going to get into our deep squat, and essentially what we're going to do here is we're going to come up onto the toes. So a number of different strategies that you can use here. The first one we're going to play around with is kind of keeping the feet pretty close together. You can use the arms onto the knees for support, but your goal is to really start to work to connect your big toe into your hips from this position, believe it or not. So what you'll notice here, and this is a really neat way to warm the body up to this position, is to really play around with kind of bouncing from side to side and rotating through the big toe as you do this. So you'll notice right there it's all about the left big toe, right here it's all about the right big toe, and then on both, again, back to the right, back to the left. Now the heels are down. So same thing, placing the elbows up against the knees for support, and trying to get comfortable here, allowing the hips to drop and allowing the weight to sink into the heels. You may have limitations or issues in this, and it'd be totally fine to hold on to something at any point. some point, we kind of work this up and through a full squatting motion. So the goal is to essentially start from the most difficult portion of the squat, the bottom, to loosen everything up. This is the place where most people, frankly, never get to and spend too much time, which is unfortunate because the greatest gains in a squat are really largely had in the bottom third of the motion. And it's the portion of the motion that most of us inadvertently end up cheating and not really getting the full benefit of. So here would be another angle. This is again starting kind of from the beginning here, up onto the toes. I got the heels kind of pushing together here. You can really see this from the back. Knees are pushed out, heels are pushed together. And the goal here is to push through your big toes and to feel yourself actually activating your hips in this position. And again, you can hold this isometrically, play around with it a little bit, try to get comfortable supporting yourself, bouncing around a little bit in this position. And then again, working through rotating. The goal is to just hook your big toe. And if you saw this from the side or the back, you just want to make sure that your ankles and your feet are essentially behaving in a very similar fashion. These are angles and positions that if you look at them closely, you start to be able to notice in most people a lot of asymmetry and imbalance, throughout the communication between the pelvis and the feet, which is very important. So we then take this up into a standing kind of alternating toe touch, as well as a bilateral toe touch here. We'll have kind of both legs extension. So here you'll notice at first both legs are activated. Trying to keep the knees pretty straight, start with just a slight bend. And so now you'll notice again allowing the left leg to bend and the right leg is pushed back. And the idea is you'll see here is that just when you think you're extended, whoa, there's a whole lot more extension to be had. And this is a clever way of actually working through this. So you can use your body, your hands, and just physically push that limb into extension. The goal here as you do this is to kind of shift the weight a bit more into the heel, but you can't let go of your big toe. And if you're particularly stiff here, keeping your hands on your legs for support is comforting and just makes the whole thing feel a bit smoother. There's usually a lot of guarding behind the knees and throughout the hamstrings here. Makes it difficult. So once you've got to a point that this feels comfortable, now the goal is to start pulling yourself down and into this position. So now work the legs back and using the pull motion from the back of the leg to pull the spine down into and towards the legs. You'll notice here playing around with a little bit of bend back and forth. This is kind of the ultimate position that we're trying to get into. You'll notice a momentary leg lock with quite a bit of bend in the spine. And for a weightlifter, for somebody who is attempting to do a lot of things in the strength and conditioning realm, losing flexibility and mobility is a major problem. So this work is extremely helpful. Next we go into platoon. This is an exercise that's all about hip and spine extension. So first you'll notice popping the hips forward just like in a glute bridge, right? Lean back, pop the hips, squeeze the glutes, and work this motion kind of over and over until it feels like there's really strong activation of the posterior hips, the glutes. And ultimately what we're trying to get into here is eventually drop back into spinal extension off this position. So there's a number of ways of attacking this, and you'll notice here the second phase of this now starting to occur where we essentially got those hips locked in and we attempt to start migrating into a little bit of spine extension now. So now we're kind of back bending, but we're only back bending off the hips. So if a person felt discomfort in this at this point, something's wrong. And any discomfort that would be created would solely be at the expense of the glutes not staying activated. So there has to be a really excessive posterior tilt going on here, belly button pulled into the spine, and the glutes have to be completely taking on the brunt of this in order for this to work. Another way to connect into that is to really start paying attention to and feeling the push, if you will, through the legs. So what you want to be doing here is feeling yourself pushing down through the lower leg, knee down, into that big toe and creating a kind of co-contraction by pushing out and down into the ground activating the hips. You can also get this by creating a bit of a squeeze in, driving the heels in towards one another. So if your heels are touching, especially at this phase, the very, very back end of the back bend here, we can get into a lot of neat work, being able to keep this whole posterior chain on and in turn activated. So again, this is the most difficult of all the motions that we're going to cover, and in essence, much of what's been done up to this point is designed to set the table for this motion. So now we're getting into bringing the hands up over, which is the most difficult element of this particular variation. So once the hands start coming up and overhead, now all the weight is being put into the hips and the spine. It might seem subtle, but the weight of your arms and the leverage that is in turn created puts a lot of torque on the body. So the goal is, again, to look at each phase of this as almost like a new movement in its entirety, because believe it or not, one of these subtle little changes can make a large difference. So the goal is to really make sure that you take your time here and don't push this too much and try to aggressively go beyond what your body will allow you to do. So again, push it a bit more here. This is a pretty good example of a nice warm-up. I'm not trying to, drop all the way down. I'm really trying to show you what this looks like from beginning, which is usually stiff and kind of difficult to get into at first, and it's a slow progression to get back into this motion. And with each of these resets, if you will, where you see the body kind of taken back through, you're reminding the body of each of these components that needs to kind of turn on. There's some variation in kind of arm movement there you can see, but that is the key. In this last progression here, we'll drop this essentially kind of much closer to the ground and take this lower. Again, warming the spine up a little bit, and nice and easy, rocking the body back and through. It's really important that the core stays on and activated. That's actually what I'm working on here, is to not disconnect kind of around that belly button area, and to just gently and slowly get the body to acclimate to a belly button inward pull, a posterior tilt, pulling the glutes under, and very slowly leaning back off that activation. This is arguably one of the most important movements that anyone who sits all day can engage in on a frequent basis. And here's kind of the full motion there, taking the body all the way down. The last couple of movements we'll cover here will be from initially a half kneeling position here with the one of the legs in full extension here, out to the side, and our goal is to think about this more in the frontal plane. So this is much more of essentially like a groin, inner thigh pull now. And the goal here is to maintain big toe connection on the right foot, so I don't want to externally rotate or roll off the outside of my right foot. I want to keep the weight down and through that right big toe, and what I'm trying to do is drop back and roll directly forward over that left hip. So you'll notice here that in allowing that left hip to come just slightly out into abduction, we're now almost thinking about trying to do the splits where we've got one knee down and then one leg extended. We can see this from the side. And again, from the side, you'll notice here that that left big toe is pretty much in line with that right knee. And now we'll add in one slight little variation where we implement just a little bit of a twist or rotation through the body. So the goal is to, again, drop back, stay upright with the body. You'll notice I move that leg a little further back, a little better in alignment now, and then rotate as we come up and across the body. The rotation to the left is what creates even more of a pull across that inner left groin and thigh. And this is, again, arguably one of the more important areas that gets neglected for many of us. This particular motion tends to get into some of the pinchy or uncomfortable sensations that people will get pulling across the groin and into the hip flexor. So with this last variation, we're just essentially taking this into the splits. The goal here is to understand that this is not effective if we allow the body to roll off that big toe. And what we can also play around with is a little bit of back and forth bend here between one side. So you're trying to just kind of sink into this motion and almost like roll your hips down and in slightly, along with allowing yourself to shift your weight a little bit more into one side at a time. And that will do it. So again, great routine that you can do on your own on a daily basis.